couple weeks ago, I changed my training program along with my training goals, and because I posted a updated workout split not too long ago, I wanted to do an updated version showing you all the changes that I've made. The program I was running previously was more geared towards hypertrophy, and that's not to say that I'm not focusing on hypertrophy to some degree in my program currently. I am focusing a little bit more on strength components. What I mean by that is where prior I was doing mostly machine-based work, I wasn't doing a whole lot of barbell exercises. I am now switching gears a little bit and I am incorporating more barbell exercises. As you can see here, I'm doing some sumo deadlifts. I want to get back into doing sumo and deadlifts and barbell squats because I want to focus more on strength, whereas before I was focusing more on muscle growth. I had actually moved away from some of these more barbell-based movements for a period of time because I was experiencing a significant amount of knee and back discomfort, and I wanted to work on my foundations when it came to strength in those areas and make sure that I wasn't creating further damage. Now, I think it's important to note I was still training those areas. I was not avoiding, back strain. I was not avoiding tension on my knees. I still worked through those movement patterns. I just did them in a slightly different way. So instead of doing, say, barbell back squats, I was doing pendulum or hack squats. And instead of doing sumo deadlifts, I was doing RDLs. And the reason for this is just that it allowed me to still work through those movement patterns, but avoid a little bit of the strain that I was experiencing with more free weight movements or with exercises that required muscles that may have been on the weaker side to overexert themselves. With a movement like a pendulum squat, as you see here, because I'm using a machine, it creates a little bit more stability, and it also means that if I were to fail, say my knee were to start having issues, I'm set up in a machine in a way that I'm not going to potentially create further damage if I were to bail out or were to fail. And that's not to say that you're going to hurt yourself because you do barbell back squats. I just wanted to make sure that there was not only a physical element of safety, but also a mental element of safety. I felt a little bit more comfortable pushing myself in a machine that I did with a barbell and a free weight movement. So if you watched my original workout split that I posted a couple weeks ago, you'll see that a lot of these movements are the same. I'm not changing my exercise selection very significantly. As you saw, I did have some sumo deadlifts in there. You will see later I also have barbell squats in here, but the actual accessories and the hypertrophy work that I'm doing is pretty much the same. They're just not prioritized as much in my organization of my actual workouts, and instead I'm putting barbell exercises as a more priority movement. So I'm doing them earlier in the workout, and I'm saving things like an accessory pendulum squat or a hip thrust or an RDL for later in the workout to still get that hypertrophy work, but not make it my number one priority. I also still take a lot of my hypertrophy exercises close to or to failure. However, with the free weight movements, I'm not necessarily taking them to failure as often as with more strength-focused movements. We don't necessarily want to be maxing out all of the time. Now, if I were running like a strictly strength-based program, I would probably be doing a lot more of I would not necessarily be going to failure as often as I do with more of this like hybrid programming where I'm focusing on both goals simultaneously. And this is not to say that this is like a superior method. This is not to say that trying to focus on both goals simultaneously is necessarily the best method, but it's the method that works for me, and it allows me to keep things interesting while still, seeing progress in two different sides of training. Because when you get to a certain level of experience, you're gonna have a harder time seeing both strength and muscle improvements simultaneously. Now, I'm not saying that you will not see hypertrophy if you're focusing on strength, and I'm not saying that you will not see strength improvements if you're focusing on hypertrophy. You just won't necessarily be seeing the maximal effects of either one of those if you're focusing on both simultaneously. And again, I'm speaking to experienced lifters, so people who have been doing this for years and years. If you are a novice, if you're pretty new to this, or if you had changed your training style significantly, say you went from doing like Orange Theory to actually doing barbell exercises and doing like more strength focused exercises, Orange Theory is a little bit more on the cardiovascular endurance side of things. If you were to make significant changes to your program like that, then you are absolutely going to see significant strength and muscle growth effects. But for me, because I'm not a competitor, I don't feel this need to only focus on the most, quote, optimal way to do something. I don't focus on the absolute best way to do things, because for me, the best way to do things and the best way to see effects is to make it interesting enough for me to actually want to stick to it. And when I just focus on strength, or I just focus on hypertrophy, I start to see a decline in my motivation, and then I do not stick with my program as consistently. And basically what happened a couple weeks ago is I was doing hypertrophy training, and I just got to this point where I was like, I just want to see how much I can lift. I want to see how much I can squat. I haven't squatted in months. I think the last time I squatted was in May, again, because I started having those knee issues. And so I wanted to change gears and, see what I can do in these departments. And again, I'm going to be still doing hypertrophy work, but I want to incorporate squats and deadlifts more. I'm also benching. I was benching the whole time because I wasn't having any issues with upper body. But I want to incorporate the squats and deadlifts again to see how much weight I can move in those departments over time. Obviously right now, I haven't tried to PR anything, but I did test, I think my 3-rep max on both of them. And I think they did actually end up coming out higher than my previous numbers, which is great, which means that I still saw strength progress, even though I was solely focusing on hypertrophy for 7 months. But now I want to actually get those numbers up. My goal, probably not in 2024, but maybe in 2025, is to get my overall up to 800 pounds. So I need to increase my bench to, I think, 175. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think I want to increase my bench to 175. I want to get my squat up to 305, and I want to get my deadlift to, I think, either 325 or 335, would put me in an 800 total. Yeah, I just did the math. That would put me at 805. So that's my goal. Again, I don't think I'm going to hit those numbers in 2024. I would have to be putting pretty significant numbers on all of my lifts in order to hit that. But I think in 2025, I could potentially do it, barring any more physical issues that I might face. So as of right now, I'm running a 4-day lifting split, and then I did just start adding in cardio. Of course, I overshot myself and decided to start doing sprinting. I sprinted yesterday, and my knee was not loving it. So I may go back to some more steady state cardio, just while my body starts to adjust to the more strength-based program, and then also incorporating cardio again. I have just found that my heart rate is shooting up a lot during my barbell exercises, and I want to make sure that my endurance is keeping up with my strength in order to make sure that I'm making the best of both. So as of right now, I am running 2 upper body days and 2 lower body days. I'm currently barbell squatting and barbell deadlifting once a week, and I am barbell benching twice a week, and then I am adding in accessories of both. So you can see here I'm doing some dumbbell RDLs as my quote accessory deadlift, even though it's pretty significantly different from a sumo deadlift. And then for my accessory squat, I am doing the pendulum squats that you saw earlier. Eventually, I will likely add in barbell squats and deadlifts for a second session. So I will treat the second session of, say, sumo deadlifts. I'm probably going to add in some deficit sumo deadlifts because I'm having a harder time getting the bar off the floor. That's my sticking point. I will have those as my accessory on my squat day. And then on my squat day, I will have or on my deadlift day, I will have an accessory squat movement. And as you've seen, I'm kind of doing that to a degree right now with the pendulum squats and the RDLs, but it's going to be a little bit more specific to barbell squats and sumo deadlifts. This might also mean that I add in a 5th lifting day again, but at this moment, I'm just not finding that the frequency is working for me. So instead, I'm focusing on the 4 days of lifting and adding in the 5th day of cardio, and then I have 2 rest days. Otherwise, at the moment, when I'm doing 5 days of lifting, I'm just way too sore, and I am not motivated to lift on that 5th day. I think it's also important to note that I am currently bulking, so my weight is increasing, which I do think is going to be really conducive to seeing both strength increases as well as muscle growth. And when it comes to my hypertrophy work, as you can probably tell, especially with my lower body, I have a very glute focused exercise selection. The reason for this is that my hamstrings and my quads are incredibly dominant, and I am 100% okay with them growing, but in an effort to make sure that my glutes keep up with them, I do a lot of glute isolation and glute biased compounds. Now, I do have pendulum squats in there. I do find that when I have RDLs and squat variations, my quads and my hamstrings grow plenty, and so everything else I'm doing with a glute bias, or I'm doing, as you can see here, I'm doing glute isolation. This is kind of a funky machine. This is called a gluteator. A lot of if you wanted to do something, if your gym doesn't have this machine and you wanted to do something that has this abduction and hip extension element simultaneously, you could do a glute medius kickback and it would have a somewhat similar effect. One thing I'm probably going to be adding to this program is some adduction work. I have, after kind of experimenting with the squats and deadlifts over the last couple of weeks, I have realized that my weak point is probably my adductors, which is basically your inner thigh, which are responsible for bringing the legs together. So I'm probably going to be adding some adduction machine work in here because I do think it will help with my knee stability as well as just overall strength in both of those movements. I'm also likely going to be adding some core work in on that 5th cardio day, as I do think the primary reason that I was having back issues was just a lack of core strength. I do have pretty good core strength, but I think I need to work my hip flexors and my core as it relates to the lengthened position. So basically when the legs are fully extended, because I think a lot of the movements that I was doing when I was originally working on my hip flexors, especially as it related to my knee health, was in a shortened position. So when the hip was in flexion. So I'm just going to be adding a little bit of core work in on that 5th day. Oh, this is actually a good example of an accessory to a primary lift. So instead of doing a standard barbell bench here, I am doing a spota press, which is where the bar is pausing a couple inches above my chest in order to work through a weak point of the movement. At some point, I'm likely going to be swapping this out for a Larson press, which is basically where I have the feet up, they're not on the ground, so that I can improve my strength when I don't have the addition of leg drive. And as I'm sure you've noticed, I don't do anything like push-pull. While it's not in any way a bad split, I find that it's best for people who are training more than 3 or 4 days a week because it allows them to target those movement patterns multiple times. If you're only training 3 or 4 days a week, then you're only really able to do push and pull a single time. And in my experience, having a little bit more frequency will allow you to see more significant improvements on those movement patterns. I also find that if I'm hammering, say, pushing movements one after another, I don't perform as well. By the time I get to like the 5th exercise, I'm not going to be putting in maximal effort. Whereas if I alternate a little bit and I have, say, a bench press and then some kind of back movement, I'm able to take those movements closer to failure or really maximize the amount of weight that I'm moving because I'm not just hammering the same movement pattern back to back. Okay, and that is my split. Obviously, I didn't include the cardio day. I think that's probably pretty obvious what that looks like. But let me know if you have any questions about my exercise selection or the way that I chose to break up the individual days. I hope this was helpful, or at the very least interesting, kind of looking at a training with a multitude of goals rather than just a singular goal. And of course, if you have any requests for future videos, please let me know in the comments.